popular guy.
It's a real honor to be here. My name's Mark Galley. I'm the governor's appointee as the Secretary for Health and Human Services for the state of California. And I just want to begin by thanking all of the folks behind me who had many other things to worry about today. Many local folks who are themselves thinking about the threat of fire, thinking about how they take care of their families and friends during these power shutoffs, and they took time to talk to us about the experiences that they're having and some of their suggestions for how we as state leaders partner better with our communities, our cities, and our counties. And 2 days ago, I was with the governor in Los Angeles, and we heard questions about what are we doing for our most vulnerable Californians. What are we doing with folks who need power for their life-saving equipment? What about refrigeration for people who have life-saving medications that they need every single day? And we took those questions and shared what we were doing at that point, but took the governor's charge and challenge to come up with some more innovative ideas. And 48 hours later, we've had some new partnerships. We've worked with some of our local health plans to identify individuals who are their members who have needs and are vulnerable in their communities, to be able to outreach to them, use the case managers to ensure that they have what they need. And then I'm really proud to introduce April to my left from SEIU 2015, who represents a large number of the in-home support services workers across the state, who they themselves, many of the folks in purple shirts behind me, take care of some of our most vulnerable Californians, making sure their daily needs are met. And we forged a partnership and created some new tools, some new assessments to make sure that we can better take care of and plan for these emergencies. So I'm pleased to introduce April. I'm grateful that you picked up the phone, that you called us and said, hey, how can we help and what can we do? And this is the beginning of what will be a number of new initiatives we have, not just through government to government, but through government and many of our private partners in the community. So with that, April, I'll turn it over to you and say thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Galley, and thank you all. I want to thank, first of all, the governor for being the leader that our state needs in this moment. I want to lift up the 400,000 long-term care workers that I get the honor every day to represent, that are members of SEIU Local 2015. As Dr. Galley said, our members do the work of caring for the most vulnerable seniors, people living with disabilities in the state of California. And what I heard from them 3 weeks ago when the first power outage happened is that we can't let this happen again. And so it was my responsibility to pick up the phone and call, and I'm glad that the governor answered. I am proud of this partnership. I am proud to say that our members every day are on the front lines, living, right, with folks who are being impacted, not just by the fires, but by the power outages. And they know, like no one else, what it takes to get a wheelchair-bound person out of the home, right, and into a shelter. They know what it's like to figure out how do you care for someone living with diabetes who doesn't have access to insulin that'll help them when they need it. And so we look forward to deepening this partnership, to using the skills and the knowledge that our members have to help keep people safe and to help save lives. Thank you.
Thank you, April. Thank you, Dr. Galley. Thank you, April, and thank you to all the representatives behind me, including our local representative and all of my friends, the Neighborhood Emergency Response Team, which I was a member in my day. When I was a county supervisor and a resident of District 2 in San Francisco. So I have deep admiration for the folks that are truly on the front lines, even before the first responders. All of you, thank you for the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with you to update on where we are and where we're going as a state. The next 72 hours is going to be challenging. I could sugarcoat it, but I'm not. We have, I think, done a very admirable job of connecting dots. I have been working with legislative leaders local elected leaders, leaders of all stripes, all up and down the state over the course of the last number of days. Just having gotten off a number of conference calls with leaders representing counties, leaders separately representing cities, large and small, up and down the state of California. And we continue to maintain our vigilance at the State Operations Center, which is at its highest level of collaboration and cooperation, not just with local officials, but federal officials as well. It's an interesting moment to be in because we're in an anticipatory phase that is obviously rather anxiety-inducing. And I just want to acknowledge the anxiety, the fear that people have about this moment. Not only are we battling 6 large wildfires up and down this state, the most significant, certainly most familiar here in Northern California, the Kincaid Fire, but also the Tick Fire in Los Angeles. That alone creates anxiety, but also this time of year, let's be candid, creates anxiety. You don't have to go back very far, 2018, 2017, 2015, all record years, the most acute wildfires this state had ever experienced. We are trying to avoid that fate, and not only in the moment, but also as it relates to predicting the future. So far this year, we've been able to be spared the most acute fires, but nonetheless, we are entering into a season that's very familiar for 3 reasons. 1, low humidity. 2, very dry conditions. And 3, most significantly, very windy conditions. Wind is what brings me here back into this region today. We're expecting significant increases in winds, gusts in some parts of our state, up 70, 75, by some estimates 80 miles an hour. We are anticipating those gusts to begin as early as this evening, over the next 40 hours, 48 hours to be most acute, but beginning to taper down in the northern part of the state within about 72 hours. Then we'll be experiencing similar weather patterns entering in the southern part of the state and then reverting back later in the week to the northern part of the state. That's the nature of the world we're living, and that's reality. And so anticipating that, we are doing things we've never done in our state's history, and that is we began anew in the beginning of this year with a very, very proactive agenda to set a course to advance a series of initiatives to be more focused on prevention than we have in the past as it relates to emergency evacuation, emergency planning. We provided an initiative that allowed for $50 million of local grants for emergency preparedness campaign. That initiative you've sent down, or rather legislation, AB 72, in the early part of the year. We didn't wait till the budget was signed. We've done a series of executive orders that precipitated in immediate, medium, and long-term strategies to address vegetation and forest management. I did an emergency declaration before an emergency to prioritize 200 vulnerable communities. First time our state had ever overlaid the issue of socioeconomics and fire vulnerability together. And that ties this moment together. We looked at it through the prism of those that needed the most support, and we would prioritize those that needed the most support in terms of our efforts to support them in evacuation planning, defensible spaces, and the like. Those 35 high-profile projects, a number of them are complete, many of them are almost complete, and a few are underway after stubborn start. Nonetheless, this state continues to advance our efforts at a scale, as I suggest, we haven't seen. $1 billion of additional resources was provided this year in the budget, not only for prevention strategies, vegetation management, forest management strategies, but also prevention strategies that included pre-positioning, anticipatory strategies, more engines, more personnel, pre-positioned in areas of the state before incidents occur. We have been the beneficiary of the leadership of CAL FIRE, the Office of Emergency Services, and mutual aid, local law enforcement and first responders that wisely had pre-positioned dozens and dozens of assets throughout the state that have advantaged our fire suppression efforts. The reason you haven't seen many headlines is because of some of that pre-positioning. Moraga was just one specific example. You saw 2 examples in Southern California, and respectfully and remarkably, considering the size and scope of the Kincaid fire, we had pre-positioned assets there that actually has helped aid our efforts to mitigate them to this moment. By no means have we denied the fury of that fire, because 44,000 people were evacuated at 10 a.m. this morning, potentially impacting now the Windsor area and Healdsburg area, and there's concern as the winds whip back up that more evacuations may be in order. But suffice it to say, we have been proactive. We also have been proactive in holding our largest investor-owned utility accountable. I want to remind people that there was a plan that was put into place by the legislature and the Public Utilities Commission, a plan that was advanced a number of months ago, a plan that is now being executed. We didn't wait to react to this moment. We aggressively advanced this effort that requires $5 billion of safety improvements to be made by the three largest investor-owned utilities, wildfire mitigation plans that are required on an annual basis, a new subcommittee at the Public Utilities Commission that's exclusively focused on safety, bringing in experts, the best and the brightest from around the world, to full-time focus on the issue of prevention, safety, and accountability. We tied, as a requirement to a new utility fund, compensation for executives to be tied, their bonuses and stock options to be tied to their public safety records. Those are laws on the books. Those are efforts already advanced underway. And yes, we anticipated what now is referred to commonly as PSPS. I remember on two specific public occasions talking about PSPS, I didn't see a pen touching paper because no one knew necessarily that that would be so common in our vernacular today. But what was not uncommon was, again, a recognition that we needed to invest in that future at peril of not doing well there. And that's why we put $75 million of discretionary grants for our power shutoff program. Yesterday, I announced that we were beginning the process of distributing those grants, $26 million to the counties, $10 million to the cities, providing resources to tribal nations, and providing access to flexible resources at the state level. In my conversations with local electeds, that has been well received, and those monies are being distributed and utilized as we speak. So we are advancing our efforts at all levels, and we are making sure that we have all assets as appropriately needed pre-positioned to address the next 72 plus hours. Let me be specific what I mean by that. I talked about $1 billion. $109 million of that was for new Black Hawk helicopters that allow us nighttime suppression technology. We have additional resources for C-130s, which will be large air tankers that will be coming in under the CAL FIRE flag. Those dollars were put forward in this year's budget. More money for machine learning and artificial intelligence. People have talked about the importance of LiDAR technology as well as drone technology. Resources were put in this year's budget. Access to Pentagon's technology and satellite technology, novel strategies of partnerships have been advanced in this year's fiscal year. We have also pre-positioned and invested in a historic amount of cameras, including that camera that found that first flash here in the Kincaid fire that allowed more immediacy in terms of response. More cameras are being procured, but the money was placed in the budget. That money is being distributed, so hundreds of cameras will be put up not only by the state, but also by the investor-owned utilities themselves. I can continue, bless you, around the technological front, but it just gives you a sense of anticipation of this moment. But there's nothing more important, forgive me my long-windedness, I think it's always important to remind people of where we've been, where we're going, to also make this point. We can't do this alone, and that's why this moment is an important one. Health and public safety. Health of our seniors, health of our most vulnerable, those with disabilities, those with mobility impairment, those that are on dialysis, those that need particular medication that needs to be refrigerated, those members of our community that don't have access to cell phones, that don't have access to the tools of technology so many of us take for granted. We thought about partnerships. Hospitals have requirements for backup generators. Our hospitals, we feel, broadly speaking, are secure, though we're also doubling down to make sure that's the case. Community clinics deal less with the acute, but a lot of private clinics, like dialysis clinics, deal with the acute, to make sure we're reaching out the private sector, as Dr. Galley said, but moreover, to reach out to our labor unions. It seemed self-evident when April reached out that just SEIU 2015 alone, representing 400,000 in-home supportive service workers, IHSS workers, is just one of 2 unions in the state. The other union with an additional 100,000+. The ability for you to identify those most in need, most vulnerable, that's in your database, it's in your mind, it's in your hearts. It's the work you do every single day. That partnership now is spreading in a truly bottom-up way that we hadn't been advancing in the past. So thank you, April. Thank you to SEIU for inspiring that partnership and reigniting this effort truly at a grassroots and localized way. I want to thank Mark Galley for his work with a county hospital frame, a county and community-based frame, again, working with his former colleagues and with colleagues up and down the state to look at existing databases that identify the most vulnerable and beginning to de-silo some of that data in a way where we can put together a collective database that will be state-of-the-art. And this is clearly something the state had not done in the past, and this is something where we have still work to do. But I assure you we're in that process of having a robust database that can be updated in real time that will aid us in these efforts going forward. So that's broad strokes what brings us here today. Let me briefly, and I know it's not been brief, but let me briefly make a final point. Peril, I've exhausted you. The tick fire is 25+% contained. I say plus because we're going to get the new numbers very shortly. Tick fires had serious evacuations in Southern California. We believe we have a framework of support for that suppression effort that will allow us to now move forward aggressively with suppression, and we can get our arms around it. The other major fires, the 2 in San Diego, one is 70% contained, the other 75% contained. The Northern California Muir Fire is substantially now contained. It's a way of saying this. Of the 6 major fires, 2 remain of deep concern. The others we feel we have our arms around. What's interesting about the fires at this moment is that it's rather normal. Doesn't feel that way. But this is not abnormal, this moment in our state's history. This is not exponentially worse, nor is it substantially more modest. It's about normal. What is not normal is the power shutoffs. And we're anticipating a few million people being impacted by those power shutoffs that overlay at the same time. That's why we're working with telecommunications and getting these portable cellular units out there so people can access their portable electronics and continue to be able to access notification, push alerts. We're continuing to work to make sure that we're providing resources in these islands that may be blacked out, including partnerships with Walmart and partnerships, forgive me for spreading brands, but I give them credit for engaging Costco, Safeway, Raley's, among others, to make sure that in these blackout areas that some of these super centers remain open so people can access fuel, food, personal care items, diapers, I'm a parent, as well as medication. And we are working collaboratively with those private sector partners. We're also pre-positioning assets in partnership with FEMA as if we were preparing for a major earthquake in case we are required to distribute those assets. We have already begun the protocols and the processes to make sure that they're pre-positioned and we're prepared for the distribution. We also are working on a new statewide emergency declaration that will be forthcoming, and that declaration will provide more flexibility and localized resource access. We have been securing FMAG support, and I applaud the Trump administration for their support and thank FEMA for their quick response. FMAG provides reimbursements up to 75% for emergency related costs. So all of those things have happened. Again, federal government, local government, state government rowing in the same direction. I'm not Pollyannish about this. I'm not naive about what we don't know in terms of what's going on. But what we do know, blackouts have just begun in parts of Northern California. In the next few hours, you'll start seeing them move south, near and around where we are here. Later in the afternoon, Peninsula, northern parts of the Bay Area, and then tomorrow morning down in Kern County. That is just within PG&E's territory. That does not include the activity for the two other investor-owned utilities, Southern Gas Electric. The others are SCE and San Diego Gas and Electric. They will be advancing their own protocols as well. So again, that's the totality of this moment. And I just want to conclude by saying this: go means go. When someone asks or someone hears that there's been an evacuation order, go means go. Do not put your life at risk. Trust the experts. Trust the assessment that's been made by those whose entire lives are consumed by keeping people safe. And finally, don't take this out on the men and women in uniform and the men and women that are driving the trucks working for the utility companies. They are brave souls working hard to keep you safe. They did not create these conditions. These conditions were created over the course of decades. And we've inherited the mismanagement of some of the largest investor-owned utilities and the mismanagement, respectfully, as it relates to suppression technologies and strategies, as it relates to managing our federal forests, of which represent 57% of all the forests in the state of California, as well as the modest amount of state lands and private lands. Collectively, we've created this condition, and of course, no greater impact than Mother Nature joining this conversation as the hots are getting hotter, the dries are getting drier, the wets are getting wetter, and the winds are becoming more and more a factor in this environment where climate change is wreaking havoc on a state that has enjoyed 5-year drought and then one of its wettest years after those 5 years of drought, creating the conditions that exist today. So thank you for the opportunity to conclude, exhaust the tape and the audio. And now we're happy to answer any questions.
Governor, PG&E, Michael Morris from Bloomberg News. PG&E has said that they intend to be more surgical in their power outages. Can you speak to your thoughts on that effort, given the scope of the current set of power outages that we're anticipating?
That's the biggest differentiator between PG&E and the other investor-owned utilities. As you know, going back to 2007, San Diego Gas and Electric began a process of de-energization. They were one of the first utilities to use targeted efforts where they can literally power down 5 or 6 households, 10 or 15 customers. We have that contrasted here in Northern California with the largest investor-owned utility that works from the Oregon border down to parts of Santa Barbara County, operating in conditions that are some of the most treacherous conditions as it relates to wildlands, that have not upgraded their equipment, that allows them to secularize their shutdowns. And as a consequence, you have these scaled shutdowns, not these surgical shutdowns. So I appreciate the sentiment, but what I don't appreciate is the lack of intentionality over the course of decades of investing in the tools and technologies to address that. That said, they have been, starting last year, investing on the technology that begins the process of allowing them these more surgical shutdowns. And more of that is required of them now under the legislation we passed. And over the course of the next few years, I think we'll see substantial improvements. That's why I suggest this is not the new normal. Normal suggests normalcy. Normalcy suggests status quo. We are not arguing for the status quo, and we're not going to experience the status quo, but we are in a dynamic environment, and one simply can, if you're going to be truthful, if you're going to be honest with people, and you're not going to play politics, and you're not going to play to the punditry, and you're not going to play to the critics. You have to look people in the eye and say, what took a few decades to be created simply cannot be turned around overnight. And so we're going to have to work through this, and we will come out more resilient, more safe, and more reliable on the other side. I don't think that, I know that. But we're going to have to work through this, and we want to keep people safe as our top priority, and we're going to hold people accountable, and we'll do it in a transparent way. And I assure you, in a few years, we'll be not having the kind of conversations at the scale that we're having today.
Governor, you talk a lot about mismanagement by the utilities. At the same time, this PUC has been providing oversight. It was been responsible for providing oversight of those utilities over time. So how much of this responsibility
it's shared.
blame
That's why I changed leadership of the PUC. got a new director of the PUC. I've got a new safety division that we created. There were certain logistical issues at the PUC that weren't advanced as it relates to public safety oversight of our utilities, and that's been changed. Since I got here, we changed that. Working with our legislative leaders, we've changed that. So we got new personnel, new rules, new regulations, new oversight, new energy, new focus, new tools, new authority, new regulations. All of that we've advanced. I can only account for my 9 months. Not 19 years, not 9 years, my 9 months. And I'm very proud of the work that we have done together to proactively address that legitimate point that PUC plays a significant role and will moving forward to address this issue. Anybody else?
Governor?
Could you, Giacomo Luca, ABC 10 News Sacramento, could you talk about some of what that $75 million could be used for in terms of, what county is going to be used for, specifically the PSPSs?
Appreciate it. So what we did is we provided that $75 million, $26 million goes to the counties. We distribute it on the basis of base grants, depending on population size and depending on if they've been impacted by the PSPS. Those grants go from anywhere from $150,000 for the small counties to $300,000 base grants, and then proportionally increase based upon their impacts in size. At the city level, $500,000 per city, the big 13 will benefit from. And then, of course, the other beneficiaries are the $1.5 million for tribal lands. And why does that matter? Ask folks at River Rock, who were supportive with $1 million, or rather $1 million, I don't know how much it cost, but 1 million gallon well that they had, storage facility. We were able to draw down from that, and our first responders were able to benefit from. So we're providing resources to tribal lands, and then $37.5 million is made available to the state to distribute generators, to distribute backup support, battery support, medical supplies, real-time communication equipment, rental equipment, logistics needs. You fill in the gap. Real discretion at the local level, because localism's determinative. Not the state prescribing what needs to happen at the local level. Local government saying, here's what we need in our own unique circumstances, and they'll have the discretion to provide for that.
Governor, James Van, KPIX News. What are your sentiments on the shutoffs themselves? Do you feel that it's in the best interest of folks to protect them, safety, or is it a detriment?
So let me answer that as honestly and forthrightly as I can. The night before the campfire that took 85 lives, we had 60 to 65 mile-an-hour gusts. PG&E chose not to de-energize. The next day, we had substantially lower gusts and sustained winds. 85 lives were lost, the most historic and devastating wildfire in California history. Coulda, shoulda, maybe would have, if we were beneficiaries of hindsight. It's a very difficult question. The scale and scope is clearly unacceptable. The mismanagement of the website was unacceptable a few weeks ago. The mismanagement of the call center was unacceptable a few weeks ago. The mismanagement of the communication, not just to local individuals, community leaders, but to cities, counties, the state, was unacceptable. So if we're going to move forward with targeting these de-energization process, they have to address all of the above. Now, a number of things have been addressed, but the communication, the notification issue remains, including just an hour ago, as Dr. Galley and I were talking, and I'm going to a community that was just notified 4 hours in advance of potential blackouts, not 48 hours in advance, as a proof point of the legitimate anxiety and anger and fear that they face under these circumstances. So these are difficult calls. The professionals need to make them, but a society as industrious and entrepreneurial and innovative as ours should not have to face a choice between public safety and public blackouts. We can do both together, and that is what path we are on, and we are going to hold them accountable.
Thank you.
Governor, you had said recently that you were talking to some entities about bids for PG&E. Can you expand upon that a little? Are we talking about other municipalities or companies?
Oh yeah, we've been, some of you may recall that participated in a number of press conferences and the white paper we put out. We very explicitly talked about the importance of having a competition for PG&E's assets. We put that in writing. We also made that clear in multiple occasions, and we continue to pursue bidders for PG&E that move beyond just one or two that currently are positioned to make a bid through the bankruptcy process. We hope to get PG&E out of bankruptcy by June 30th of next year. It should not just be hedge funds. It should be municipalities as well. I have had a number of conversations, in fact, very formal letters exchanged between the city and county of San Francisco and their municipalization issues and interests. Sam Liccardo as well, my chief of staff, also supplementing those conversations. I talked to Mayor Libby Schaaf a moment ago, maybe an hour or two ago. Many others that are looking at the prospect of potentially making bids. So we want to see competition in this space, and I know that the bankruptcy judge wants to see competition. I think that's healthy. I think it's appropriate, and it's made more challenging, clearly, in this environment, but we're doing everything we can to increase the choices that the bankruptcy process will provide.
Last question.
The CEO of PG&E was not on the briefing yesterday, and apparently is not going to be on it again today. Do you have any thoughts about him not appearing at those briefings?
I don't have the benefit of the specific briefings, but we've been in constant contact with Bill Johnson. We have continued to strengthen the partnerships, particularly when we took over their website a few weeks ago in partnership with Esri and Amazon and Microsoft. Forgive me again, but thank them because they helped with that website. It shows you, how far behind they were, but they're making some improvements there because of the partnership of collaboration that has been enhanced in the last few weeks. We were able to secure more resource centers than they had provided in the previous blackout. In this blackout, triple, I believe, the number. So we want to continue to strengthen that. We need to work together. We can, lament. I can express my very, honest opinions, my objective opinions about the mismanagement over there, but a lot of it, in fact, 90% of it predates Bill Johnson. He wasn't even around. He wasn't even living in the state. So, one has to, you can't deny that. It's not about personalities right now. It's about the corpus, the entity, and the culture that predates the current oversight and board of directors and CEO. And that's the problem.
Spoke with him.
Oh, I spoke a couple days, I can't remember how many days back, but we're in constant communication with his team and constant communication at the senior staff levels and the Office of Emergency Services level.
Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for, that was long, I know. I apologize. Thank you for standing up. It's all good, you remember.
Yes, I do. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys.